Have men a right to migrate? It is crazy. I've never really thought about this much till I got into Georgism. Yeah, free sex, huh? The mere statement of this question brings out its own answer. Sure seems that way. There can be no freedom greater than equal freedom. Whatever right I claim for myself, that I concede to my brother. I mean, these terms of rights are always odd. How about, you know, the right to pick my own nose? Well, maybe I should add that to my drafts. Uh, Talk of rights is tricky. I guess just boils down to our intuition, maybe? Counterexample. The right to pick my nose. You don't have that right. You have the right to pick your own nose. So, is nose picking right subsumed by body rights to your own body? What about pooping and peeing? What is the principle underneath rights? I do not know. One idea is the right of one is the only thing that limits the rights of the others. My right to land is limited. Your right to land. So, if I have a right to pick my nose, then your right to pick my nose is limited by that. From hmm, I don't know. Have you married or had to change your habitation from St. Paul to California? California. Then that same right you must accord to every other one of your fellow men. Have you a right to expatriate yourself and become a citizen of England, China, or Afghanistan with equal citizenship? Of course I have. then you must accord that right to every other person on earth. All rights must be equal. In short, each person must be free to choose for himself his place of abode. And so long as he encroacheth not on the equal freedom of his fellows, no one may deny him. Isn't all right? So the obvious thing to say is, yeah, you're encroaching on me if you wanted to move to Cerritos. What's he got to say about that? The favorite reply of the restriction is to someone of solace. Of course, no one man may justly deny solace or equal right with himself to right or place but all people. Through the regular channels, they may make regulations and restrictions. This is true. The principle of equal freedom is a fallacy, and that part of our Declaration of Independence which asserts that all governments derive every just power from the consent of the governed is nothing but an iridescent dream. No, the immortal declaration is right. Immortal declaration. Governments can have no powers except such as rest originally and equally in each citizen, individual citizen. What is a just government? Consider what is a just government. Simply an agent of the people chosen by the people to do certain things for the people. What are these things that the people may delegate to their agent, the government? Only such things as each citizen would have a right to do for himself in the absence of government. And of these, only such things as the citizens choose to delegate. You can't delegate your agent a power you don't possess. Your right to interfere with other people's migrations is just nothing. No other citizen has any more right than you. 65 million times nothing equals nothing. A creature can never have rights its creator does not possess. So governments can never possess powers which do not inhere in each individual citizen before they come together to create their government. I am aware that there are certain classes of socialists who claim that the powers of governments are limited only by the will of the majority. But such claims rest upon investigations so shallow and are plainly at variance with the principles of equal freedom upon which our democratic republic is founded, that they should be regarded as curiosities instead of being seriously considered. Curiosities. It is also claimed that because the members of a family may justly resent encroachments on the sacred precincts of the home, therefore the people of any country may with equal justice drive away peaceable immigrants. The cases are not parallel. The peaceable immigrant enters no man's home unbidden. He simply comes here to make a home of his own in his own way. And this he has the same right to do as had the Pilgrim Fathers who planted their habitations on Plymouth Rock. The only limitation that may justly be applied to the peaceable immigrant is the same that applies to every other citizen. Simply this: he must not encroach upon the equal freedom of his fellows. True, our Congress attempts to enact laws to prevent people from coming to this country, but all such laws are simply tyrannical usurpations of power, without the slightest shadow of right behind them. Public sentiment may sustain them, just as it sustained the superstition of the divine right of kings to rule and rob the people, just as it sustained for centuries the laws for the burning of heretics, just as it sustains today all sorts of laws that interfere with the divine right of every man to free thought, free speech, free labor, free land, and free trade. But in the very nature of things, all such laws are void for want of authority. Void because there's no power on earth that has any right or ever can have any right to enact them. Having shown that no people can possibly have the right to prevent peaceable immigration, I now desire to show that the coming of others not only does no harm to those already here, but really benefits them. Imagine yourself alone on an island. Or, if you please, alone on a world. How poor, how weak, how insignificant you are. You must supply for yourself all your own wants. You must plow and sow and reap and thresh and grind and bake before you can eat bread. Your clothing in every part and every detail must be of your own make. Whatever shelter you have, you alone must construct. You have no one to aid you, no one with whom to divide the cares and the joys of life. How gladly would you welcome the distant sail? With what heart-throbs of hope would you watch its nearing? With what ecstasy of delight would you note the fact that an immigrant was coming? Even one would make you glad, but many would bring greater gladness. And how doubly joyous would you consider it if, among the many strangers coming, you could but note the happy smile of some sweet maid of your former acquaintance. Attempt to restrict immigration. No, 'twould be the last thought to rise within you. Think of the blessings those immigrants would bring. Now the subdivision of labor is possible. Now each can devote his energy to the production of such things as he knows most about, and then exchange with all the others. Now the joys of home and fireside cast about you their holy influences, and soon the patter of little feet reminds you that immigrants from out of the great unknown are doubly blessed in coming. Stop immigration? Never. Each one of the 10 or 100 now occupying the island can enjoy many times more of the comforts and blessings of life than before they came together to cooperate among themselves. How anxious you all would be to open up communication with the outside world, that you might exchange the surplus products of your labor with men beyond the sea, and thus get such comforts and luxuries of life as on your own little island you could not produce. With what scorn and contempt you look upon the person who should seriously suggest that you ought to build a row of custom houses around your island, and fill them with politicians whose duty it should be to protect you from the evil effects of swapping goods when you wanted to. Isn't it always true that 10 men working together can produce far more than 10 times as much as any one of them working alone? I don't know about these claims. So also 1,000 under condition of freedom can produce far more than 1,000 times as much as one. This principle is universal. Like 1,000 game developers, if they were all solo, would make 1,000 games. If they all worked on one game, it would be one game. If they worked on 10 games, 100 people on each game, be 10 games. So a lot of it comes from how you quantify their produce. I think if you made 10 games with 100 people on each, there's a good chance many of those 10 games would be better than one game made by 1,000. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if the 1,000 all equally sort of shared in the profit, they would organize better. No, that can't be. There has to be a breakdown at some point, right? If you think of 1,000,000 people, would you, like, at the end of the day, do we want 1,000,000 people making one game? Well, suppose then you could then break it down as, yeah, if you just look at total produce, a million programmers that were free laborers would break into different groups and make many different products. Anyway, let's keep going. The greater the more completely the labor is divided to each student working in a specified only they are no capital P provided only they are left free to exchange their surplus products. The greater the wealth of each, and the more each can have to enjoy. Someone may here suggest that if all were permitted to come freely, the island might get too full of people. Nonsense. Before the island got too full, the people would stop coming. Bum bum bum. Then what if somebody suggests, what if they're just being born? Which gets us into Malthusianism, which is related, but I you don't have to deal with that issue. Um, uh, what's the word? What happened to my? There it is. Um, yeah, immigration doesn't have to deal with that question. People can choose where to immigrate to, whereas with overpopulation, you have to deal with that issue, which George does talk about. Why restriction seems necessary? Why then does restriction of immigration seem necessary? Why does the incoming of our cousins from over the water seem to do harm? Why does it in reality intensify the competition among the workmen and make immigration seem a curse, when in reality it ought to be a blessing? Let's see what he says. These questions can all be answered in one word: monopoly. All the good things for which men labor and strive and think and plan must of necessity be brought forth from the earth by the exertion of man. In the language of political economy, labor produces all wealth. But labor can produce not one single particle of wealth unless it can have land to work upon. Now, yeah, these writers, early 20th century, late 19th century, were not focused on service industries. The food we eat, the clothes we wear, the houses that shelter us, even our very bodies, are all derived from the earth. All are the result of labor applied to land. Without the earth to use, human life is impossible. What sort of a welcome does the immigrant receive who comes to this boasted land of the free, seeking a place where he can use his energy and skill for the betterment of himself and all those who were here before him? Is he permitted to use the earth to satisfy his needs? Yes, if he can pay the price monopoly has placed upon land. May he not travel from place to place in search of cheaper land, or that he may find an employer to hire him? Yes, if he can pay the price that law-favored highway monopolists charge for a ride. I wonder what institutions this is sort of referring to. I guess maybe the railroads. I don't know. Can he go afoot and thus escape excessive transportation charges? No, he will be arrested as a tramp and put in jail, his only consolation being that some of those who helped make the laws that caused him to become a tramp will have to pay taxes to support him while he is there. Suppose he can pay the price demanded for transportation and for land, is he allowed to keep and enjoy the products of his labor that he may thus become a good and self-reliant citizen? No, the tax gatherer is bound by law to fine him for every good thing he does, in order that some land speculator may the more readily blackmail his fellow men. Suppose by hard work he overcomes all these unnatural obstacles that stupid laws have put in his way, and has a surplus of wheat or other product. Is he permitted to exchange that surplus in order to get the things he needs for the maintenance and comfort of himself and family? Yes, but condition. If he exchange with his brothers who live outside the imaginary line that separates this great free country from the rest of the world, Then he must give up from 1/4 to 3/4 of all he gets to a legalized robber called a customs collector before he may go home with the remainder. Or if he chooses to exchange with someone on this side of the line, he must pay the monopoly price that our tariff was designed to enable the home producer to extort. Suppose he submits to all these robberies and finally gets home with the fragment that remains. Is he let alone to enjoy it in peace? Oh no. The tax assessor comes around and fines him every year for having it. What a grand and glorious free country this of ours is, to be sure. Is it any wonder that immigrants coming here to compete with our own laborers for a chance to work? How could they do otherwise when we shut away the earth from them and compel them to beg employment of the favored few upon whom our system confers the privilege of owning the planet on which we live? This is just as true of those immigrants who come through the natural channel of birth as those who come from the distant lands in ships, and to restrict, so now he is connecting it to population, as of those who come from distant lands in ships, and to restrict, well, I guess you could argue that the analog to immigrants choosing not to come here would be parents choosing not to have children. Hmm. Um, why then do citizens of foreign lands come here, and why do so many of them come in spite of all these evils that await them? Simply because they are compelled to suffer more evils where they are. But the tyranny of old world despotisms is no excuse for ours. Because in one country a man is robbed of 90% of all he produces, is no reason why in another he should thank God for the robbers who take only 75. Thus it appears that the problem of immigration does not stand alone. Freedom of migration is as clearly the right of every human being as is freedom to breathe the air. Monopoly alone is the cause of the evil. 4. The remedy. What then is the remedy? Again, the answer comes clear and plain. Abolish monopoly and restore freedom. These evils have been brought about by laws. He liked my comment. Does he like everybody's comment? What? Looks like he likes everybody's comment. Oh, I need to edit this. Seems like that's the only way we can have a legislature that is not dominated. Oh, nonprofits, and there's so much desire to live a good life and to help others, and it is just so terribly channeled. I'm noting this. So much effort and charitable spirit is channeled by badly designed systems. It is overwhelming. And to simple it, energy just dissipating a bit of heat into space. Alright, back to, who's this guy again? C.J. Buell. Carl J. Buell. Also known as Charles? Is Carl short for Charles? I never knew this. Free man is what Carl meant. I have to name my kid Carl Clark. It does come from Charles Clark. Organized the Minnesota Tax Reform Association. He ran in 94 in general and lost. He won in the primary and won, and then in general lost. Wow. Hey, Janning. I definitely know Chuck is short for Charles. I never knew Carl could be short for Charles. Have you seen this this article? I mean, it's just so painful that I don't know if it's like, you know, that like we like people figured this out 150 years ago. And yeah, it's long. So is my blog post today. There's more to figure out. And it's like George, like you know, it took me 10 seconds to accept Georgism. Took me a day or two to like learn more of its dynamics, and then maybe a year to like read the book a few and figure it out. Oh, very good. Thank you. Did you watch the Caddyshack video at the end though? Um, uh, I think they did stop motion to get that ball right on the edge of the. Get him. Get that little Monopoly gopher. We don't know. We don't know if this works. What do you think's canon? I say he survives. The Monopoly Go for always is creeping, lurking below. I don't know why the clubs were out of the bag. Way to go, kid. Why is it going for so long? Alright, Mr. Buell continues. Abolish monopoly and restore freedom. These evils have been brought about by laws. Yeah, lots of familiar faces. That restrict and interfere with the rights of man. The remedy must come through the repeal of those laws and the restoration to man of his natural right to be free. Not more laws added, but many existing laws repealed, is the kind of legislation we now need. Our watchword must be more liberty. We must erase from our statute books all laws that tax men in proportion to their industry. Oh, that tax men in proportion to their industry. No man should be taxed more because he has made a piece of land useful than another is taxed for holding an equally valued piece of land idle. The great iron hallways of the country, I guess those are railroads, must cease to be the private property of such as the Goulds and the Vanderbilts, the Hills and the Huntingtons. I guess I have this big question. What, why did the railroad stop being uh, popular? So what, we like broke up the railroads. And then I guess we just funded all of the highways. Yeah, but why didn't, I mean, railroads are still way more efficient than for most modes of travel and the I don't know what's the word, cargo, I guess, or um, than a bunch of individual cars. I don't know, beyond the scope of this article. They must be made real, free public highways, and all must have equal rights to use them, just as they now use the lakes and rivers, the bays and oceans, the country roads, and the city streets. BNSF won't let Amtrak passenger trains use their tracks. Yeah. I don't know when BNSF became BNSF. Probably when we like busted up 1849 actually. So it's Aurora Branch and Pacific. Well, then they merged in 1994. I don't know. All must have equal rights to use them just as they now use the lakes and rivers, the bays and oceans, the country roads, and the city streets. All existing laws that tend to currency. I mean, I would be okay with cars and highways too if it was all free, but I just had to go pay for a smog check and have to pay 100 and something, almost $200 to renew my license, or I mean renew my registration for my car. Man, I want to live without a car, but I mean, I'd be happy living with a car if it was not expensive and isolating and poisonous. But um, yeah, that's like how I recently read something talking about how like having a car in Amsterdam was actually really nice because it wasn't trafficy and you could use it for longer forms of travel. Mm, and then still primarily your day-to-day operations just do on foot or on bike. Anyway, all existing laws that tend to currency monopoly, I guess must be repealed. The money of the country must not be made to favor either state or national banks. When was this written? 1894. This is pre the Fed. Nor to give the owners of mines a greater price for their products than they will command in the free markets of the world. But most important of all, and first of all, imagine promoting multimodal transportation to decrease car congestion and make driving pleasant. Imagine. Imagine all the people. Um, Most important, first of all, land monopoly must be destroyed. We must recognize again nature's only title to land. Oh, I forgot in my blog post to talk about price stickiness, which you brought up in that conversation. I actually had that in my draft. Didn't make the cut. It's funny. Uh, yeah, part two. I have to finish my Land of Louis novella. Um, we must recognize again nature's only title to land, the title that rests upon possession and use and the value of land. That value which is produced by the presence of population and evolution of society. The value of land must be taken for public use, not allowed to swell the private fortunes of mere title holders. Look over this fair America of ours today and see how few and how scattering are its people. More than all the inhabitants of the United States could live in peace and comfort east of the Allegheny Mountains were it not for the curse of land monopoly. Less than half the land even in New York City is really occupied and used. More than half is only partially used or is held idle by speculators who expect to reap large profits from the increase of value, which always comes with increase of population. Why do men hold land idle? For no other reason than to pocket the difference between the yearly value. Some of the spacing got messed up. Between the yearly value which the public gives and the yearly taxes which the public takes. How can land monopoly be abolished? By making the yearly taxes which the public takes equal to the yearly value which the public gives. Yes. When the public takes what it produces, it won't have to rob individuals of the product of their labor under the pretense of taxation. Adopt the single tax. The vacant lot industry is a thing of the past. All laws that pretend to grant corporations or individuals any special favors. You know, I should have just recorded this for the Henry George Daily Devotional. I was like, oh, I'll just read this first. But now, like, this needs to be shared with the world. Needs to be shared with the world, but I'm not willing to reread it. I could reread it. Although it's too long. It's too long for a Henry George Daily Devotional, right? I've been going for 40 minutes. I don't know. The IU should do what? Make a post a blog. I mean, not that Henry George A. Devotional has much of a viewership. Yeah. I mean, nowadays, can't you just copy paste any text and just ask for a good AI voice to read it and it's like pretty decent? Or no? Is it not good? Is it not good? I don't know. I don't care. I'm not looking it up. What I could consider doing for my blogs is what like Terry Barishis does with all of his. Um, he records a voiceover.
Damp who are activists of certain institutionalized corruption is
I would have fun reading my blogs. I would definitely be tempted to go off script, which was very dangerous. Cameron Murray. Why do I have mixed feelings about this person? Who is Cameron Murray? Not not the athlete. Fresh economic thinking. Is he on our side? Is he on the right team? I don't see George mentioned anywhere. So he's talking about upzoning. Okay. He's like a big YIMBY. Landlords selling equals first homeowners buying. Gotta dig. Fresh economic thinking number 40. I guess it's a blog or a podcast too. Yeah, this picture looks familiar. Yeah, I don't know. I've read this. I've read some of his stuff before. Huh. Upgrade to paid to play the voiceover. Maybe that's how I make my money. Older posts are very LVT. Well, let's return to Buell. All laws that pretend to grant to corporations or individuals any special favors must be abolished. All men must be restored to their rightful condition of freedom, and then let alone to work out each one his own career, unaided by government bounties or favors, unhindered by repressive or restrictive legislation. Democratic government is possible only under conditions of equal freedom, and that equal freedom must not be the variety proposed by restrictionists and paternalists, where all are equally oppressed by a governing class, but that broad and genuine freedom where each person has perfect liberty to do whatsoever best doth please himself, so long as he does not interfere with the equal freedom of his fellows. Yeah, I feel like when people talk about specific rights, when you look for the principled view, when you're talking about, oh, somebody has a right to live here, live there, a right to jump up and down, a right to do whatever, or the joke I was making, the right to pick your nose. I guess, in a broad way, what if you say, you can do whatever you want so long as it does not, I don't know, bother or infringe upon doing that same thing to other people. I don't know. I'm sure there's a body of philosophy that talks about this stuff. I guess this just sort of, you can do whatever you want, and as long as whatever you want to do, other people can do as much as you. All men must have equal rights to be on the earth, to move about on its surface, and to use its materials to satisfy their needs. Each one must be the owner of his own powers and capacities. All that his labor of hand or brain can produce is his own, and he must never be compelled to yield to individual or state any part of the product. The value of land, which is not in any sense a product of individual labor, properly belongs to the community that has produced it. When this value is put into the public treasury, where it may meet all public requirements, taxes on labor will be unnecessary and can be abolished. This simple, practical change in our system of taxation, on the one hand, destroys land monopoly and restores, wait a minute, partial pricing. I forgot, hosting mutuals. Look at all my notifications. Question mark. Huh. How does, how do they make money? Because I'm thinking about doing this for future video game meetups or George's meetups. Anyway, um, each one must be the owner of his own produce. He must never be compelled to yield to individual or state any part of the product. The value of land, which is not in any sense a product of individual labor, properly belongs to the community that has produced it. When this value is put into, I don't know what you would say to this, Janning. I had somebody saying like, well, when society creates value, it's not like everybody creates exactly an equal amount of that value. So why should it be returned to all of them at like a flat equal rate? And um, my thoughts are that A, it is true that the value created by society is not created equally by each person. Um, you agree. So you don't think a citizen's dividend should just be a flat rate for all people in the area? How do you how do you determine? Yeah, but I thought the difference I forget exactly. Residence dividend. Um but how do you like my dividend is do you advocate that like two neighbors, both residents should get a different amount? Yeah, okay. Yeah, not owners. That's fine. But let's say I have a twin brother named, Marks. Max and Marks. And I work hard, but Marks is lazy, doesn't work hard. But we're both residents. We both live in the same house. We have different rooms. Just want to make that clear. I see. Um, So how do you I mean residence is a bit tricky. If I you would hmm I guess I'm just thinking about, how much commuting there is presently. You would assume that that would uh I mean even like, I say I live where I live now, but I drive into downtown LA every day to work. So I'm creating all this value in downtown LA, but my residence is, 30 miles away. And I don't see why that would go away under a Georgist. I mean, I think a lot of people would choose not to do that. I think a lot of people would choose, especially if transit were constructed differently, most people wouldn't choose to live 30 miles away from their place of work. Yeah, I think I remember like Warbler was posing that kind of um, idea. But I mean, but are you proposing just one status, either resident or non-resident, for one like municipality, right? Like you're either like an LA resident or not, or are you saying that it would go like block by block through Los Angeles and people who are residents in the most valuable areas would get a higher dividend? Because that seems like a weird feedback loop. Because then people would want to live there more, so its land value would go up, so they'd pay higher. I mean, maybe that'd be okay. They'd be willing to pay a higher land tax, and then they would get a bigger, a bigger rebate, as you put it. Um, is there any place where George? I always was a little bit frustrated that George didn't seem to have a clear citizens dividend method proposal, at least in Progress and Poverty. But maybe in his other works he does. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, 'cause like it just seems like, the value of a piece of land is determined through this sort of averaging, like it's like, the value comes about as like what the average person in that society could gain by working at that or having access to that piece of land. Um, and then you average that over all of the pieces of land. So it does seem weird where you draw the line or not, but it does seem like, you know, an equal return to all people seems pretty reasonable to me. Like, the land tax sort of serves to make it where if you work downtown, that makes sense for certain jobs, and then working a little bit outside from the city makes sense for other jobs. But I'm not sure why you have to assume that one is actually contributing. Hmm. Yeah. Well, I don't think running to the middle of nowhere with your UBI would still be that particularly common. You wouldn't have access to all of the good things that civilization, society give you. Like if you're running to really, really bad land, you won't be able to work much. But there would be this middle sense. That's true. That maybe you're right. That would cause sprawl, where it's like I can still live pretty far away from the city center. Um, well, you can only live off of UBI if the money that you get is enough to pay for all the things you want. And if you're living far away, if we take this extreme and you're living off in Antarctica or something, a UBI wouldn't support you because it wouldn't support getting all of the things you need to you. You're so far outside of society. So it can't the extreme doesn't work. But in the middle distance, the far out like which is where I'm not sure about, like living in the suburbs or the exurbs, um, well, we are sort of subsidizing those places with all of our car infrastructure. Um, and so in a sense, those people already are subsidized. So you'd imagine in some sort of idealized George world, um, living in suburbs or exurbs would be a lot more expensive um, than it presently is. So getting a UBI and living out in the boonies, not all the way out in the middle of the desert or Antarctica, still would be pretty expensive. And so you wouldn't really be living a very good life. And there's a sense in which I tend to think most people will not choose to do that, but some amount will. And I guess I might, for one side of this argument, push that very few people will do that, and that would be fine. They're getting, they're taking their, like the prodigal son, they're inheriting their share of the earth and then sort of squandering it. But that's their right as a human. And some of them we might say are squandering it, and some of them are just wanting to be sort of living a hermit life. Um, and like there's, in a fully owned, fully a land where everything's all owned, you can't really go off and be a hermit because you can't just go out to any unowned land, but with the UBI you could, maybe. the question is, do you get this other kind of closer to home sprawl, like just the near suburb sprawl, and people doing sort of a half C kind of thing? Um, I don't know, but it does seem that if let's say I owned a parcel downtown and I lived there, and then I had to pay a high land value tax because everyone wants to live downtown. Let's say I'm just a very selfish person, or well, we don't even need to speak to that, but if I get a large LVT rebate and I'm paying a large LVT, then it's like I'm not paying the LVT or a lot less of it, which seems to undermine like the way that the LVT works is that we don't just average out everything, right? We charge a lot for the high value land. We take all the land value. And it doesn't feel like it should be returned any like because equivalently, like say if there's some good land and some bad land, and you and I have exactly the same capabilities, and one of us works the good land and one of us works the bad land, we just flip a coin, and then every day you're making 500 pieces of utility, and I only make 100 pieces of utility. But you and I are equal in every other way. If we switched pieces of land, you would make 100, I would make 500. I'll read your comment in a second. Let me just think this through. Um, if the LVT, I mean, this is sort of what I work through in my Berryland post. If the citizens dividend, so all of our, so we could in this world where there's two plots of land, one of them makes 400 more units of utility than the other. So it basically would be taxed at something like 400 units, and then my crappy marginal land that I can only make 100 units, that would have zero tax. So then those 400 units that were taxed would be put into the pool of public funds and then just split evenly between us because we assume that you and I both worked exactly the same amount. And so that it's fair then, because you got to claim the good land, and I had to resort to the bad land. It's fair then that would be split equally between us, 200, 200, in which case we both end up with 300 units of wealth. We both labored the same amount. Uh, it just so happened that you were on the good land and I was on the bad land. In that very limited case, um, I mean, it's very clear you and I have put forth the same amount of exertion, but in some sense, you definitely did create more production in the world. Like you created more value. Um, but I think it's fair in this sense that that was that the production is then split equally between us. All right, what did you say? So within the proposed framework, we have subsidiarity and we have diversity in governance. We compare how a jurisdiction which minimizes UBI but maximizes residence dividend performs against the jurisdiction which maximizes UBI and minimizes residence dividend. Um, I get, okay, so you're just saying, yeah, I would, we could set up two different land trusts and try both systems out, sure, and then we would get some data. I think the issue is with thinking that dividends are tied to exertion when wages are tied to exertion. Hmm. I think the issue is the issue is with thinking that decision. Um, I mean, okay. So let's go back to my little example. You're on the good land, I'm on the bad land. Uh, we do a bid, but actually before we go on the good and bad land, we bid. Um, and I say that I would be willing to pay. Uh, or you and I both say that we would bid 300 in, or what did I say? 400, I think. 400. We would both be willing to pay 400 in taxes to use the good land. Because we realize if we don't get the good land, we'll at least be able to make 100. If we work the good land, we could make 500. So we both would be willing to pay 400 for it. We tie, we flip a coin, you win, or I don't know, it doesn't matter. We flip a coin, one of us, and you end up on the good land, I end up on the bad land. If we both work our normal amount, I would make 100, you would make 500, you would then pay 400 in taxes. Now, one of us could choose not to work as much. Uh, I could just not work, in which case you're still going to pay 400 a year in taxes, and then I get 200. Um, and that seems, hey, that guy's a freeloader. And in this case, I am definitely freeloading. Uh, and then in the other case, it could be that um, I work full time, make 100 units, and you decide only to work half time because your land is so good. So instead of making 500, you end up with 250. Um, in which case you agreed to pay 400 in taxes. So you're heavily punished. You're gonna have to go. Let's say you work almost full time and you make 450. Well, you still pay 400 into taxes. 200 go to me, so I end up with 300 because I worked full time on my land, got 100. Then I get half of your taxes, 200. You didn't quite work as hard as I did, so you worked, 37 hours a week or whatever, and you end up making 450, giving away 400, you have 50, and then you get half that 400 back, 200. So you end up with 250. So, you know, it's not exactly tied to exertion. Like, I guess the reason I went through that example was to say that the returns, the citizens' dividend is based on the average amount of produce that people in that society would gain from working that piece of land. Um, like if we go back, if we think about the example where I didn't work at all, after 1 year of that, where you worked full time and made 500 and had to give up 400, and then I got 200 and you got 200, and I didn't work at all, then you would be like, all right, let's do a new bid for the land this year. This guy, he's not even going to work it, so I'm not, maybe I don't want to pay as much in taxes in the we do a harbinger tax. So instead of self-assessing at, a 400 units per year tax rate, since I know that Max is super lazy, we could say he's super lazy, or we could say he doesn't know how to work, or he's just bad at working or something. Um, I would self-assess, down to like 100 units a year or something. And then if Max then says, "Oh no, I will pay 100," well, then he'll get it. But given that he doesn't work at all, he might just be like, "No, I'm not willing to even bid 100." And then the second year happens. Janning works hard on that land, makes 500 units of value, um, has to give up 100 in taxes. So you end up with half that back. So you end up with 450. I did absolutely nothing again. Or maybe this year I worked hard because I didn't get. I know I'm not going to get as big of a citizens dividend back. So I get my 50 in citizens dividend, and if I didn't work, then that's all I get. And I think that that makes sense to me. Um, where I get sort of stuck is just the binary option of like, and I guess that's just like what tax jurisdiction you're in. I don't know. It'd be like you could just be like, oh, let's just have a universal government. You could do a moderate form of each. Nothing prohibits that. Uh, yeah. You could, and I'm open sort of testing these things. Um, I just think some of the idea of that like inverts the justification. Some of the idea of assigning individuals or and of assessing individuals' contribution to land value. Seems like that would be like an inverse uh, operation that from the land value tax. So I think I'm on Shen's side. Usually I'm against Shen whenever there is a dispute in the Georges world. I mean, I don't know if I really am. I guess I've just argued with him about patents a bunch of times, like twice or three times. A contribution to land value is not based on exertion. Right, I guess. I didn't, not sure why you think I thought that. I guess I described it as determining who contributed most to land value. I see. I just don't see why you would assess it based on where someone's a resident. I'm focused on productivity and wages. Yeah. To me, it seems reasonable that you're either part of a given tax jurisdiction or society, in which case you get the citizen's dividend as your inheritance of the earth, and you can either use it well or use it poorly. But it doesn't make sense to me that the person who lives downtown should make or get a big LVT rebate or a larger citizen's dividend than somebody who lives in Midtown or on the outskirts of town. Because it may work out that I just prefer like my whatever I'm doing is Yeah, you say residents, but you were. I mean, I agree that it should be the person living downtown has to deal with living in greater density. Yes. I mean, that could be, I mean, you say deal with, like, that is not necessarily a good or bad thing. I mean, that's what the market determines if people want to keep moving into a downtown area or if on average they prefer to live in not the downtown area. Yes, they would get more services. Like the downtown area becomes the downtown area because a lot of people, like that's the place where most people prefer to go. Which is your whole argument as to why you think people will want to live closer if they can afford to. Um, hmm. I mean, I know that Georges talk about the land value is like perfect. Sometimes I think it's like Fred Voldver or something wrote about the value of land is like perfectly equal to the public works done around it. That's a little confusing to me. Or, oh, proportional to it. Okay. I could see more of a proportional thing. At least that claim makes sense. Um, Negative externalities versus positive externalities. So they're displacing others as much as they're being displaced. I'm losing sort of track of what our argument is. All right, you're heading out. Good enough. Now I can just claim all of my positions without any opposition. Cool. Yeah, you go earn wages. Me, I don't know what I do. I gotta finish my video game and then who knows. I'll finish reading this though. Democratic government, whatever that means, is possible only under conditions of equal freedom. And that equal freedom, huh. So that's an interesting argument for not needing sortition, would be that just like labor right now is not free and so businesses bloat, uh, electoral politics doesn't work well um, while all the votership is wage slaves. I don't think I buy it because I think no matter, even if you had not, if you had the LVT in full, you'll still end up with a distribution among the population of wealth, uh, and you still would tend towards having the wealthier people run for government. And you would still tend towards a lot of the two party dynamics that just arises from the nature of candidates and representation through election. My head is anyway. Carl Buell thinks this is possible, and that equal freedom must not be the variety proposed. Oh yeah, we read this. restrictionist and paternalist where all are equally oppressed by a governing class, but that broad and genuine freedom, where each person has perfect liberty to do whatsoever best doth please himself, so long as he does not interfere with the equal freedom of his fellows. All men must have equal rights to be on the earth, to move about on its surface, and to use its material to satisfy their needs. Each one must be the owner of his own powers and capacities. All that his labor of hand or brain can be, yes, he must be, never, yes. The value of land, which is not in any sense a product of individual labor, properly belongs to the community that has produced it. When this value is put into the public treasury, where it may meet all public requirements, taxes on labor will be unnecessary and can be abolished. This simple, practical change in our government, in our tax system of taxation, on the one hand, destroys land monopoly and restores to labor its natural right freely to use the earth, while on the other hand, it takes the burden from labor's back and leaves it free from the crushing weight of indirect taxation. Thus, again, we reach the same conclusion that only in freedom for the individual man we shall find the cure for all our social evils. Freedom to think, freedom to speak, freedom to act, freedom to use the earth to produce things that are necessary to life, comfort, and happiness. Freedom, absolute freedom, to exchange the products of his labor with his fellow men the wide world over, with never a custom house nor a collector to interfere with his trading. Freedom to cooperate with his fellows in all things, and never to know that government exists, except when he pays for the value of the land he uses, or when he attempts to encroach upon the equal freedom of his fellows. With freedom established and monopoly, especially land monopoly, destroyed, the problem of immigration is solved, its terrors have vanished. The innocent comer from over the sea is no longer an enemy to take our work away and reduce us to a meaner standard of living, but a friend who comes to help us while we all rise to better conditions and heights of nobler manhood. I would like to read this at some point, but I can always you Google it again. Monte Cristo, Artesia, smog check, smog check. Why can't the US build ships? Because of land monopoly. This is one of the most deeply impractical articles I've read on any subject in a long time, to borrow a shipping metaphor. The article's aircraft carrier by the payroll. Oh, no opinion. I'm so jealous. Oh no, this is Brian Potter. But whilst I don't know the details, I can imagine. Mm -mm -mm -mm. Wish I could like bookmark. Hmm. did a bunch of research.